Standing in the front part of the store, Sarah took a green print dress out of a big cardboard box. She held it against her chest. "Look, Mama," she cried. "It's my size. It's almost new and it's really pretty." "Try it on." Mama shook her head as she opened the flaps of another carton. "More groceries. I can't believe how good everyone has been to us." Sarah ducked behind the curtain into the private part of the store. While she changed, she thought about the 3 days since the storm. It had been like Christmas. Boxes of groceries and clothing kept pouring in from all over town. Sheets and towels and furniture, beds, dressers, 2 small tables. Someone had even given them a discarded wood-burning cook stove. They now had 2 ovens, just what they needed. They'd be able to bake a lot more. Sarah and Carla had helped Mama fix up the back of the store, while Daddy and Mr. Willard moved the cook stoves in and hooked them up to the chimneys. They had already started to bake again. Sarah came out from behind the curtain as she twirled around to show Mama the dress. "It looks nice, honey." Someone was knocking at the door, and Mama walked over to open it. Through its long glass panel, Sarah saw a man standing outside. A truck was parked on the street behind him. "Mama!" "Oh, ma'am," he said, "I have a big table in my truck here. I thought since you folks were in the baking business, you might want it. It's been in our basement a long time, and we don't need it." "That's ever so nice of you," said Mama. "I'd be happy to take it, but I'll have to ask my husband and daughter what they think." Sarah followed the man outside while Mama went to get Daddy, who was kneading dough in the back. The table was laying on its side, and it was huge. It must be 7 or 8 feet long and at least 4 feet wide, thought Sarah. It was strong-looking, too, with its thick, swirled oak legs. They'd have to keep it in the front of the store since there wouldn't be room in the back, but it would be just right for kneading the dough. The tables they owned were too small. Sarah smiled as Daddy came out, wiping his hands on his apron. A week ago, you couldn't have paid him to step out on Main Street in an apron. Sarah guessed he'd been so busy, he forgot. "What do you think?" asked Sarah. "It would be perfect for kneading dough and shaping loaves." "It looks good to me," said Mama. Daddy shook his head. "I don't know. We don't have room for it in the back." "But we could put it up front," said Sarah. "Those tables in the back are too small." Daddy frowned. "In front of the big windows?" "Why not?" Mama asked. "I don't care if people watch me make bread." She winked at Sarah behind Daddy's back. Then Daddy had never said a word about it. They both knew that he would rather people didn't see him work with dough. It was silly, thought Sarah, and the sooner he got over it, the better. "Please, Daddy," Sarah cried. "Let's take the table. Besides, the front of the store looks bare, and when the shop is open, we could use the table as a counter." Daddy nodded to the man and grinned. "Seems I'm outnumbered. I guess we'll take it. It's mighty thoughtful of you. Here, let me give you a hand." The 2 men placed the big, dusty table in the front part of the store in full view of the large show windows. With brushes and soapy water, Mama and Sarah scrubbed it down to its pale oak finish. Then they spread flour on top. Sarah took some of Daddy's dough from the back, brought it out on the big table, and started kneading it. Soon, a small crowd gathered in the street outside the window to watch her. When Daddy came out from behind the privacy curtain, Sarah expected him to duck behind it, but he didn't. When he saw all of the people out there, he just grinned and waved. Leaning over the table, he scrawled a message on a brown paper sack. It said, "Open at noon." He clipped it to the red checkered window curtain with a clothespin, and then he disappeared into the back of the store. A few seconds later, he came out again with a big pan, and he set it down on the table between himself and Sarah. He grabbed some dough, and he started kneading it. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. "You were right," Daddy said. "We needed this table." Once in a while, he looked up, and he'd wave at the crowd on the street. "Pretty good advertising, wouldn't you say?" he asked. "It's the best," said Sarah. "Yep," said Daddy. "Nobody's going to say our bread isn't homemade. No siree." Mama looked on and smiled. A minute later, she brought out a pan of dough and started making cinnamon rolls. "When we get settled in," she said, "I might try my hand at cakes and pies. Just a few at first, to see how they go. I used to be really good at it." "That would be wonderful," said Sarah. "What do you think we ought to call our bakery?" asked Daddy. "Every business ought to have a name." "Gee, I don't know," said Sarah. "I never thought about it." "I have an idea," he said. "After all, Sarah, you won the blue ribbon at the fair a while back." He glanced across the table at Mama. If it wasn't for our champ here, we might have ended up in the poorhouse. I think we ought to call it the Blue Ribbon Bakery." Sarah grinned. Daddy must be proud of her to suggest the name, but to her it didn't seem quite right. "That's nice, Daddy," she said, "but I think we ought to call it Puckett's Blue Ribbon Bakery. It's a family business now." Daddy pronounced the name slowly, as if listening to the sound of it. Puckett's Blue Ribbon Bakery. "What do you think, Lucy?" Mama nodded. "I like it, and I think we should display that ribbon that you won, Sarah. We ought to put it in the window and let people know that our bread is made from your prize-winning recipe." "You still have it?" said Daddy. "Sure, it's in my lucky box." "Well, why don't you go get it? Let's have a look at it," he said. Sarah dashed behind the privacy curtain, and she took the wooden box out of her dresser drawer. She listened as Mama and Daddy talked. "That girl sure pulled us out of the quicksand," said Daddy. Mama sighed. "That's true, Frank. Who would have guessed that we'd be running a business in a few short months? And I just know that if we save our money, we'll be living in a real house one of these days." "You betcha, Lucy," said Daddy. "You betcha." Sarah slid the top of her good luck box and dumped it out on her dresser. She picked up the small piece of red checker cloth. It would always remind her of Carla's friendship and kindness. She glanced at the newspaper clippings telling all about how she caught the thief, and another story that she cut out of the paper telling about the storm. It had been quite a spring and a summer. Then she picked up the beautiful blue ribbon, shiny satin, with a fancy gold seal on it that said first place. A lot had happened since she'd won that prize. Most of it she'd rather not live through again. She parted the curtains and she handed the ribbon to Daddy. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Do you have a pin, Lucy?" "Of course." Mama disappeared behind the curtain, came out holding up a straight pin. Daddy took it, knelt on the display platform, and pinned the ribbon on the red checker window curtain. He glanced out toward the street. "That bunch of gawkers must have wandered off. Let's go out there and look and see how it looks." The three of them stood on the sidewalk and peered into the window. Sarah thought that the shiny blue ribbon was beautiful against the red and white checkers. She looked over at Daddy and she saw a tear roll down his cheek. Here they were, thought Sarah, in that once empty building on Main Street. After nearly starving and losing Daddy and just about everything else, they now had a store of their own. "The ribbon looks great there," said Mama. "Yep, it sure does," agreed Daddy. "And someday, when we get more money ahead, we'll put up a big sign all the way across the storefront. Puckett's Blue Ribbon Bakery." Daddy wiped his eyes on his sleeve. "Well, I suppose it's time we stop dreaming and we get back to work." Sarah pulled him into the store. "We better hurry, Daddy, if we're going to open at noon."